The Galactic soldiers marched through the dense terrain, their prisoners shackled and walking behind them. Their confidence was palpable, with laughter echoing as they joked about the supposed simplicity of their captive's world. Earth was, in their eyes, a backward planet, full of primitive tools and people incapable of understanding the complexities of interstellar warfare. The prisoner, however, remained silent. His gaze stayed fixed forward, his face expressionless. He showed no signs of fear, anger, or defiance, which only fueled the soldiers' ridicule. They spoke openly about their victories over Earth. The campaign had been short-lived, they boasted, a mere formality in their conquest of weaker civilizations. Earth's forces had put up a fight, but it was nothing the Galactic soldiers hadn't seen before. Their advanced technology and superior training had ensured an inevitable outcome. The prisoner had been captured during the final skirmish, a trophy of their success, nothing more. One soldier gestured toward the prisoner. "This one gave us trouble, though. Took out 5 of our best before we got him," he said, with a mix of annoyance and reluctant admiration. Another soldier waved it off with a laugh, declaring, "Even a cornered animal fights back. But look at him now, docile as a lamb." They all laughed, not noticing the faint tightening of the prisoner's jaw. The prisoner was unlike anyone they had encountered. His silence wasn't submission. It was calculation. While the soldiers saw a defeated man, he was studying them, committing their movements, habits, and vulnerabilities to memory. Every jibe, every careless comment, every unnecessary display of bravado, they were pieces of information he tucked away for later. His body might have been restrained, but his mind was free, moving quickly as he planned his next move. The Galactic soldiers took turns recounting their exploits. Stories of how they had razed cities, subdued armies, and brought entire populations to their knees. To them, it was routine, a way to pass the time as they made their way back to their ship. They described Earth's weapons as laughable, their strategy as amateurish. They didn't notice the prisoner listening carefully, absorbing every word. Their confidence grew as they spoke. The chains around the prisoner's wrists were state-of-the-art, designed to suppress any physical strength beyond the norm. Their weapons, holstered but ever-present, were enough to intimidate any captive. They saw no reason to worry. In their minds, the prisoner was already broken. But the prisoner wasn't broken. His silence wasn't defeat, it was patience. He knew that arrogance often led to mistakes. These soldiers were no exception. They underestimated him, just as they had underestimated Earth. To them, he was a simple human, a primitive life form with no chance against their technology. What they didn't understand was that his strength lay not in technology but in adaptability, resilience, and a relentless will to survive. One soldier, walking beside the prisoner, sneered and asked, "What's it like, knowing your planet's best efforts were nothing to us? Knowing that you'll never see your world again?" The prisoner didn't respond. He didn't flinch. He didn't even turn to look at the soldier. His silence was infuriating to them, though they tried to hide it behind their smug grins. As the group stopped to rest, the soldiers set up a small camp. They talked loudly, their guard down as they prepared food and drank from their ration packs. The prisoner was tethered to a tree, his chains secured to an anchor. They didn't bother to post a proper guard, assuming the restraints were enough. After all, no one had ever escaped their custody before. The prisoner sat quietly, his eyes scanning his surroundings. He noted the positioning of the soldiers, the placement of their weapons, and the gaps in their attention. He observed how they interacted, who gave orders, who followed them, and who seemed distracted. Every detail mattered. He wasn't planning to escape yet. He was still gathering information. Escape was inevitable, but it had to be timed perfectly. The soldiers continued their banter, their voices carrying through the night. They speculated about the prisoner's past. Some guessed he was a soldier, though they found it amusing that Earth soldiers seemed so unimpressive. Others joked that he might have been a criminal or a rebel, someone Earth's own forces couldn't handle. They laughed at their own jokes, oblivious to the fact that they were giving him more information than they realized. One of the younger soldiers, eager to prove himself, approached the prisoner. He crouched down, meeting the man's gaze, and smirked. "You're lucky we didn't kill you on the spot," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But don't think that means you'll get mercy later." The prisoner didn't reply. He didn't blink. The young soldier frowned, annoyed by the lack of reaction, and stood up with a huff. The night deepened, and the soldiers began to settle. They trusted their technology to alert them to any danger, dismissing the need for vigilance. They saw the prisoner as a non-threat, more of a trophy than a potential danger. Their overconfidence was their greatest weakness, and the prisoner knew it. He didn't need to rush. He had already won half the battle by letting them underestimate him. The atmosphere in the camp grew quieter as the soldiers drifted into casual conversation and eventual sleep. The prisoner remained awake, his body still but his mind racing. Every sound, every movement, every flicker of light from the campfire was noted and analyzed. The soldiers thought they had won, but they had no idea what they were up against. As the hours passed, the prisoner's resolve only grew stronger. He was not just a man waiting for an opportunity, he was creating one. He knew that their arrogance would blind them to the danger right in front of them. And when the moment came, he would be ready. The containment breach began with a small oversight, one the Galactic soldiers would have dismissed as irrelevant. A system glitch disabled the lock mechanisms on the prisoner's restraints for a brief moment. The soldiers, overly reliant on their technology, failed to notice the warning signal. For the prisoner, however, it was the only opportunity he needed. His years of training on Earth had honed his instincts to act decisively, and without hesitation when a window of escape appeared. The chains fell loose, and the prisoner moved quickly, silently, and with precision. His first target was the soldier nearest to him, whose weapon rested lazily by his side. A swift, calculated strike rendered the soldier unconscious, and the prisoner claimed the weapon before anyone else could react. He didn't stop to celebrate. There was no time. The element of surprise was fleeting, and he knew that hesitation would cost him dearly. The remaining soldiers scrambled, disoriented by the sudden attack. They relied on their advanced technology to coordinate, issuing commands and scanning for threats, but the prisoner's movements were too quick and unpredictable. He was already exploiting their weaknesses, using the environment to his advantage. The dense terrain provided natural cover, and his intimate knowledge of Earth's survival tactics allowed him to remain hidden despite the soldiers' thermal scanners. The first retaliation came swiftly, with the soldiers firing into the shadows in an attempt to regain control. Their confidence in their weapons blinded them to the prisoner's strategy. He didn't engage directly. He avoided prolonged confrontations and struck from unexpected angles. Each attack was precise and deliberate, targeting their equipment and their morale. His goal wasn't just to escape but to destabilize their unity. As the soldiers regrouped, they attempted to surround the prisoner, using their training to cut off potential escape routes. Yet they underestimated his adaptability. The prisoner anticipated their maneuvers and laid traps, improvising with the tools at his disposal. A discarded energy cell became an explosive device, scattering the soldiers and breaking their formation. Their confusion deepened, and their communication faltered. The chaos escalated as the prisoner's tactics became more aggressive. He used their own weapons against them, turning their advanced technology into liabilities. A plasma rifle, retrieved during one skirmish, allowed him to neutralize their heavy artillery from a distance. His understanding of their weaknesses grew with each encounter, and he adapted his approach accordingly. He wasn't just fighting to survive, he was dismantling their entire strategy. The Galactic soldiers, unaccustomed to such resistance, began to panic. Their overconfidence had left them unprepared for an opponent who fought with such relentless determination. They relied on their advanced systems to compensate for their lack of adaptability, but those systems failed under the prisoner's calculated assaults. He targeted their supply lines, destroyed their communication relays, and rendered their tracking devices useless. The soldiers' fear became evident as their numbers dwindled. They were no longer the hunters, they had become the hunted. The prisoner's movements were too elusive, his attacks too calculated. He didn't fight like the other species they had conquered. His tactics were unpredictable, a blend of raw instinct and refined skill that left them constantly on edge. They began to second-guess every move, their confidence replaced by hesitation. In their desperation, the soldiers attempted to call for reinforcements. But the prisoner had already anticipated this and sabotaged their communications earlier. They were isolated, cut off from their command, and left to face him alone. Their advanced training was useless against an opponent who refused to engage on their terms. Each step they took seemed to lead them closer to another ambush. The physical toll on the soldiers became apparent. Exhaustion and fear began to wear them down, while the prisoner seemed almost untouched by the ordeal. His focus remained unwavering, his every action calculated to exploit their weaknesses. He was methodical, patient, and relentless. For every step they took to counter him, he was 2 steps ahead, already dismantling their next line of defense. The soldiers' attempts to regroup were met with failure. Their numbers continued to dwindle, and their morale plummeted. Each skirmish ended with the same outcome: another soldier down, another weapon turned against them. The prisoner's efficiency was terrifying. He didn't waste energy on unnecessary conflicts. Every move he made was deliberate and precise. By the time the soldiers realized the full extent of their predicament, it was too late. The prisoner had not only escaped their grasp but had also turned their strength into his advantage. He was no longer just a fugitive, he had become their predator. His ability to adapt, combined with his intimate understanding of combat, had made him an unstoppable force. The terrain that once seemed so foreign to the prisoner now worked in his favor. He used the environment to isolate the soldiers, forcing them into smaller groups where their numbers meant nothing. Each isolated encounter ended the same way, with the prisoner emerging victorious. The soldiers, who once believed themselves invincible, were now fighting for their lives. As the conflict reached its peak, the soldiers' desperation led them to make critical errors. Their fear drove them to act rashly, abandoning their training in a futile attempt to stop the prisoner. They fell into his traps, one after another, their advanced technology rendered useless against his ingenuity. Their weapons, once symbols of their dominance, became tools of their downfall. The prisoner's victory was not just physical but psychological. He had shattered their confidence, exposed their weaknesses, and turned their arrogance against them. He didn't just escape, he dismantled their power, piece by piece. By the end of the confrontation, the Galactic soldiers were no longer a threat. They were broken, defeated, and left to face the consequences of their hubris. The prisoner, silent and unyielding, had proven that their technology and arrogance were no match for Earth's resilience. The prisoner moved with precision, exploiting the gaps left by the disorganized soldiers. Their initial attempts to regroup failed, leaving them scattered and vulnerable. The remaining forces were unsure of his exact location but could feel his presence, a calculated hunter closing in on his prey. The sound of his movements was non-existent, each step deliberate to avoid unnecessary noise. His method wasn't chaotic. It was systematic, designed to exploit every advantage while sowing fear and confusion. The first soldier he targeted was isolated from the group, nervously scanning the area with his weapon drawn. The prisoner acted swiftly, ensuring the soldier had no time to react. The weapon he acquired in the process became an asset, not only for its firepower but as a psychological weapon to reinforce the growing panic. The captured tools of his enemies now symbolized their vulnerability, and each one further tipped the balance in his favor. He began using psychological tactics, creating subtle disturbances to manipulate the soldiers' movements. A deliberately misplaced piece of equipment here, an unexpected sound there, all carefully orchestrated to draw them into his traps. Their advanced training had prepared them for straightforward combat, but they were unprepared for an adversary who thrived on unpredictability. Each trap was an opportunity to weaken their resolve, and the prisoner executed them flawlessly. As the soldiers attempted to organize themselves, they inadvertently played into his strategy. Their reliance on traditional formations made them predictable. The prisoner disrupted their plans by targeting their leaders first, removing those capable of giving clear instructions. This left the remaining soldiers disoriented, with no clear chain of command. Their cohesion crumbled as each soldier began to act independently, driven more by fear than strategy. The remaining group tried to adapt, but their adjustments were reactive, not proactive. Every attempt to counter the prisoner's actions failed because they didn't understand his true objective. He wasn't simply trying to eliminate them, he was dismantling their ability to function as a unit. Their communication systems were already compromised, forcing them to rely on outdated hand signals and shouting over the chaos. This only made them more vulnerable, as the noise revealed their positions. Each encounter reinforced the power imbalance. The soldiers grew more hesitant with every step, their confidence replaced by doubt. They second-guessed their every action, fearful that it might lead to another ambush. The prisoner capitalized on their hesitation, turning their inaction into his advantage. He knew that fear was a weapon just as powerful as any firearm, and he wielded it masterfully. The soldiers' attempts to retaliate became increasingly desperate. They set up defensive perimeters, hoping to trap the prisoner, but he used their own strategies against them. He approached from unexpected angles, using the environment to mask his movements. Their weapons, designed for large-scale engagements, were ill-suited for the close-quarters combat he forced upon them. Each encounter left them with fewer resources and diminished morale. The psychological toll was evident. Soldiers began to abandon their posts, retreating in small groups in the hope of survival. The prisoner let some of them go, knowing that their panic would spread through the ranks and further destabilize the group. Those who stayed were either too disciplined or too afraid to flee, but their resolve was breaking. They no longer operated as a cohesive unit. They were merely individuals trying to survive. The physical toll was equally devastating. Exhaustion set in as the soldiers spent hours on edge, constantly moving and scanning their surroundings for signs of the prisoner. Their advanced suits, which provided limited energy and oxygen, began to falter under the prolonged stress. Meanwhile, the prisoner seemed tireless, his movements efficient and deliberate. His ability to endure and adapt was a stark contrast to their increasing fatigue. The turning point came when the prisoner began to use the soldiers' technology to his advantage. Their weapons, shields, and even their tracking devices became tools in his arsenal. He reprogrammed their equipment, turning it against them in ways they didn't anticipate. Their own technology became a source of distrust among the soldiers, as they could no longer rely on it to function as intended. The tools they had once seen as symbols of their superiority now represented their failure. The remaining soldiers grew paranoid, suspecting betrayal within their own ranks. Every malfunction, every failure of their systems, was attributed to sabotage by one of their own. This infighting played directly into the prisoner's hands, further dividing their forces. He didn't need to eliminate every soldier himself. Their fear and mistrust were doing the work for him. Despite their dwindling numbers, the soldiers made one final attempt to coordinate a counterattack. They set up a defensive position, using their remaining resources to fortify a small area. They believed that by forcing the prisoner into an open confrontation, they could regain control. However, the prisoner anticipated this move and used it to his advantage. He didn't approach directly. Instead, he disrupted their defenses from a distance, using their own weapons to disable their energy shields and deplete their supplies. The soldiers, already on edge, panicked as they realized their last line of defense was crumbling. Their carefully laid plans unraveled as the prisoner struck with precision, targeting their weakest points. The end came not with a climactic battle but with the soldiers' complete collapse. Their numbers were too few, their morale too shattered, and their resources too depleted to put up any meaningful resistance. The prisoner didn't need to fight them all at once. He eliminated them methodically, one by one. Each victory was a reminder of their arrogance and a testament to his resilience. By the time the last soldier fell, the battlefield was silent. The prisoner stood alone, his breathing steady despite the ordeal. The weapons and technology that had once symbolized the Galactic soldier's dominance now lay scattered and broken around him. He had not only defeated them physically but had exposed the flaws in their reliance on technology, and their underestimation of human capability. The lesson was clear: strength isn't solely determined by advanced tools or superior numbers. It lies in adaptability, determination, and the ability to turn the enemy's arrogance into their downfall. The Galactic soldiers, once so confident in their superiority, had been utterly outmatched by the very qualities they had mocked. The prisoner had proven that Earth's resilience was not to be underestimated. The soldiers resorted to their final line of defense, deploying heavy artillery and advanced drones in a desperate attempt to regain control. The equipment, designed for large-scale battles, was ill-suited for the calculated precision the prisoner employed. He analyzed their tactics, quickly identifying flaws in their deployment. Each weapon became another tool he could exploit, further proving their over-reliance on technology. Their panic grew as their efforts continued to fail, turning their desperation into recklessness. The general, an experienced commander, took charge in an attempt to salvage the situation. He was determined to neutralize the threat and restore order among his troops. The prisoner understood the significance of this change. The general's arrival signaled the soldiers' recognition of the gravity of their failure. However, it also presented a new opportunity. A single figure of authority was easier to anticipate than a disorganized group, and the prisoner adapted his strategy accordingly. The general initiated an aggressive offensive, deploying specialized units with advanced targeting systems to track the prisoner's movements. The soldiers, invigorated by the presence of their leader, attempted to execute coordinated attacks. However, their newfound determination was no match for the prisoner's ingenuity. He continued to exploit their predictability, outmaneuvering the advanced units and dismantling their offensive tactics. The terrain became an additional ally for the prisoner. The soldiers struggled to navigate the dense environment, which disrupted their equipment and slowed their progress. The prisoner, accustomed to operating in such conditions, moved effortlessly. He used the natural barriers to isolate small groups of soldiers, engaging them on his terms. Each encounter further diminished their numbers and morale. The general, recognizing the limitations of his forces, ordered a shift in tactics. He directed his remaining soldiers to fortify a central location, using their most advanced defensive systems to create an impenetrable barrier. Their objective was to lure the prisoner into a direct confrontation, believing that their superior firepower would ensure victory. The prisoner, however, saw through the plan and prepared accordingly. He didn't approach the fortified position directly. Instead, he launched a series of calculated strikes to weaken their defenses. Energy cells powering the shields were targeted first, leaving the soldiers vulnerable to further attacks. The prisoner's precision ensured that each strike counted, systematically dismantling the defensive systems they had placed so much trust in. The soldiers' confidence in their final stronghold began to crumble. The general attempted to adapt once more, utilizing the last of their heavy artillery in a final stand. The weapons, powerful but slow to deploy, were ineffective against the prisoner's speed and agility. He turned their own technology against them, creating diversions that rendered the artillery useless. The soldiers, already stretched thin, struggled to keep up with his relentless assault. As the defenses collapsed, the prisoner moved closer to the center of the encampment. The soldiers' fear was palpable as they realized their last line of protection had failed. Some attempted to flee, while others clung to the hope that the general could still turn the tide. The prisoner, however, remained focused. His strategy was clear, and his resolve was unshaken. The confrontation with the general became inevitable. The remaining soldiers, now outnumbered by their own fear, hesitated to intervene as the prisoner approached. The general, armed with the most advanced weaponry at his disposal, prepared for a final confrontation. His weapon was a symbol of their technological superiority, but the prisoner had already demonstrated that such superiority was meaningless without adaptability and strategy. The clash was swift and decisive. The prisoner's agility and combat expertise overwhelmed the general's reliance on firepower. The general's weapon, powerful but cumbersome, failed to land a decisive blow. The prisoner, on the other hand, capitalized on every opening, using his surroundings to his advantage. The general's confidence faded as he realized the extent of his opponent's capabilities. With the general incapacitated, the remaining soldiers were left without leadership. Their defeat was complete, not just in numbers but in spirit. The prisoner had turned their strengths into weaknesses, exposing the flaws in their overconfidence and reliance on technology. He didn't just survive their attempts to subdue him. He dismantled the very foundation of their strategy. By the end of the confrontation, the battlefield was unrecognizable. The advanced equipment that once symbolized the galactic soldiers' dominance lay in ruins, a testament to the prisoners' resourcefulness. The soldiers who remained were no longer combatants but survivors, too broken to continue the fight. The prisoners' victory was absolute, achieved through a combination of intelligence, adaptability, and an unyielding will to overcome the odds. The prisoner's actions carried a message far beyond the battlefield. His triumph wasn't just a personal victory, it was a demonstration of Earth's resilience and the dangers of underestimating its people. The galactic soldiers had entered the conflict with arrogance, and left it with a sobering reminder of their vulnerability. The prisoners' actions would echo throughout their ranks, serving as a warning to those who might consider Earth an easy target. The general's defeat marked the end of the galactic force's mission. Their arrogance and reliance on technology had been their undoing, and their failure would not be forgotten. The prisoner, standing amid the ruins of their efforts, had proven that strength lies not in tools but in the determination and ingenuity of those who wield them. The aftermath of the battle left an indelible mark on the galactic forces and their command structure. News of the prisoners' escape and the decimation of their units spread rapidly across their networks, triggering a cascade of fear and uncertainty. The loss of highly trained soldiers and advanced equipment was devastating, but the psychological blow was even greater. They had underestimated an enemy they considered inferior, and now they were forced to confront the consequences. The Galactic Council convened in an emergency session to assess the situation. Reports from the surviving soldiers painted a grim picture. A single human had systematically dismantled their operation, exploiting their overconfidence, and turning their advanced technology into liabilities. The Council debated whether this was an isolated incident, or a reflection of Earth's broader capabilities. The idea of a planet full of individuals with similar resilience and ingenuity sent ripples of unease through the chamber. Strategists and analysts reviewed the mission's failures, highlighting the stark contrast between their assumptions and the reality they encountered. The galactic forces had relied too heavily on their technological superiority, neglecting the importance of adaptability and psychological warfare. They had treated Earth as a primitive backwater, and that arrogance had cost them dearly. The prisoners' actions challenged their entire approach to conquest, forcing them to rethink their strategies. Within the galactic military, morale plummeted. Soldiers who had once been confident in their invincibility now questioned their training and the reliability of their equipment. The prisoner's methods became a subject of study, as commanders sought to understand how he had turned their strengths into weaknesses. This introspection revealed deeper flaws within their systems, exposing vulnerabilities that had long been overlooked in favor of technological advancement. The ripple effects extended beyond the military. Civilian populations on galactic worlds, hearing tales of the prisoners' escape and victory, began to question the infallibility of their rulers. The notion that a single human could defeat a highly trained unit created a narrative of vulnerability that the galactic leadership struggled to contain. Propaganda efforts were launched to downplay the incident, but whispers of dissent persisted, undermining the image of unassailable power. On Earth, the prisoner's actions became a symbol of defiance and resilience. His triumph was celebrated not as an individual achievement, but as a testament to humanity's capacity to overcome impossible odds. The message was clear: Earth would not be an easy target, and its people were far more capable than their adversaries realized. This newfound sense of unity and purpose galvanized efforts to strengthen planetary defenses and prepare for future encounters. The prisoner's return to Earth, though unheralded, marked the beginning of a larger movement. His debriefings provided critical insights into the galactic force's strategies, equipment, and weaknesses. Military and scientific leaders worked tirelessly to analyze this information, developing new technologies and tactics to counter potential invasions. The focus shifted from reactive defense to proactive deterrence, ensuring that any future attackers would face even greater challenges. The Galactic Council, meanwhile, faced increasing pressure to respond. Some factions called for immediate retaliation, arguing that failure to act would embolden other planets to resist their rule. Others advocated caution, warning that another failed campaign could have catastrophic consequences for their empire's stability. The prisoner's victory had created a strategic dilemma, forcing the Council to weigh the risks of further engagement with Earth. Diplomatic channels between Earth and the Galactic Council remained silent. Neither side was willing to initiate contact, wary of revealing their intentions or weaknesses. For Earth, the priority was preparation. For the galactic forces, it was damage control. The balance of power had shifted, and both sides knew that the next move would determine the future of their conflict. The prisoner's legacy extended beyond the immediate aftermath. His actions inspired a new generation of leaders, warriors, and thinkers on Earth. The lessons learned from his ordeal became a cornerstone of human strategy, emphasizing adaptability, resilience, and the importance of leveraging an opponent's weaknesses. Training programs were overhauled to incorporate these principles, ensuring that humanity would be ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Within the Galactic Empire, the prisoner's victory sparked a wave of reform. Commanders began to reevaluate their reliance on technology, recognizing the need for more adaptable and flexible strategies. The incident prompted a broader shift in their approach to conquest, as they sought to understand and respect the cultures and capabilities of their adversaries. This change, though slow and contentious, marked the beginning of a new era for the galactic forces. The prisoner's story became a legend, both on Earth and beyond. For humanity, it was a tale of defiance and triumph. For the galactic forces, it was a cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance and the power of the human spirit. The echoes of his actions continued to resonate, shaping the future of both Earth and the galaxy at large. His victory was not just a moment in history but a turning point that redefined the relationship between two vastly different civilizations.